Welcome to How the World Works, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I am Kevin Williamson, a writer in residence here. This is a podcast where we talk about jobs and the jobs we've had and how we got there and what we did before and the meaning of work in our lives and our politics and our economy. And I have here a wonderful guest with me, my sometime colleague, Chris Stirewalt. So it's another Redneck Hillbilly Summit whenever you and I get together. Chris has done many interesting things in life. He was a small town newspaper guy, as I was at part of my career. He was probably best known to many of you as a politics reporter for Fox News. He currently is the chief political guy over at NewsNation and a colleague of mine at the Dispatch, where he's what do we call you, a contributing editor?
Yes, that is the fake title that they conjured for me. I don't edit anything, but I do contribute twice weekly. And since I am appearing on a rival think tanks podcast, I should also point out that I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
I forgot about that part. Yeah. And in fact, I was on your show on NewsNation a couple of weeks ago. We had Bob Dorr there, your I guess boss over there.
It's challenging when your boss's boss is one of your panelists, because you can't say like, another sterling point, sir. You've done it again. You've done it again. Fortunately,
you also can't do the John McLaughlin.
Wrong. Cornflakes with banana. But fortunately, Robert is good and thoughtful, so that makes it easy.
Yeah, that was fun.
And by the way, I should point out something that you'll hate to hear.
Oh, please. Yes.
Your clip from that show has exploded on the internet. People love it. Tens, hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube and Instagram and elsewhere, because we were talking about something that Americans are wrestling a lot with, which is masculinity, authentic masculinity, and dudes in 2024. And there's a big appetite for that on the internet.
Yeah, I always like having these conversations about masculinity, because what you really want is, former theater critic and
totally a guy wearing a bow tie and suspenders to weigh in on
talking about manliness.
Yeah.
These are really the masculine archetypes. It's like John Wayne, Dwight Eisenhower, Tribeca dwelling theater critic.
Exactly.
Although I don't live in Tribeca anymore. Tell me about working at the newspaper. And was it Wheeling, West Virginia?
It was Wheeling, West Virginia. It was a Wheeling Intelligencer. But as I was thinking about talking to you today, I thought, what was really your first job? What did I really first do? And the answer was that my mother, when she had finished raising 5 children, came to the point when I was probably 14, that she was done raising children. she had moved across the country. I think they lived in 11 different homes, sometimes a home while they were building a home or whatever. But she was a corporate wife. She had met my dad. She was his secretary when he worked for Kaiser Aluminum. And my father did very well in corporate America. He ended up as a coal salesman. We would now refer to him as an energy executive. I'll let the siren go past. Almost. But when she was done raising children, which I was still a teenager, she bought, or my father bought for her, a kitchen and bath shop in Triadelphia, West Virginia. And they named it Herco, her company. And my first job for pay, where there was a paycheck, not doing chores or something, or helping a neighbor or something, was working in her shop. And the best part about working in her shop was the cruelty and lighthearted mistreatment that the guys who worked in her shop subjected me, an idiot, to, right? And I realized I learned a lot about how people work and what a workplace is supposed to be like, working summers in high school in that kitchen and bath shop.
What did you do there?
I swept, I carried, I held, I complained about the 90s early '90s pop country music. I I was a gopher and generally useless, but I wanted their approval. It was important to me that these guys. Um, I grew up around my growing up was bifurcated. Part of it was in West Virginia. Most of it was in West Virginia. But for 4 or 5 years, we moved to St. Louis when my dad took a big job out there, and I lived in the Tony suburbs of St. Louis. And I think I got my head screwed on a little wrong while I was there, in terms of what my values were, or what was important to me, or what I thought mattered.
You became a snoot?
I, I I'm a snoot by nature. I'm by nature I'm awful like that, but I put my snootiness on the wrong things. I think I was learning to build false idols around what kind of status, the things that I thought imputed status to people. And I think moving back to West Virginia, I was just gutted. 10th grade, back in West Virginia, I thought my family had failed and betrayed me. And then working summers doing this stuff. But what I realized was the approval of these guys and fitting in and working with them mattered a lot to me. And it was important to me that they thought, not that I was competent or I was going to one day be able to do what they did, but that they thought I was not an embarrassment, or that they thought that I was contributing something to the work that they did. And that was really important. That became really important to me.
Yeah, in terms of these psychic rewards of doing work, there is something to the feeling that you've actually done something.
Yes.
Even I mean, besides getting the paycheck and that stuff, and making sure that your bosses are at least satisfied enough not to fire you. At least getting fired by your mom would be
and she'd have done it too.
Not unprecedented.
She'd have done it. She'd have done
it. Yeah, I think mine too probably would have if I'd ever worked for. I guess I did work for a little bit. I was a furniture mover at Texas Tech University, and I guess technically I was working for my mother at that point in the College of Education. But that's another story. Um, I remember. Did you ever work in fast food? Did you ever have a job like that, like a restaurant job or something?
I have been blessed to never have to work in in the service industry. I had a crush on a girl who worked at the Gap, and I did for 6 weeks or something. The Gap imprudently hired me and then let me go after Christmas.
Yeah, I remember. So I worked at a Burger King when I was a youngster. I guess it was the summer between ninth and 10th grade, I want to say. And once, working at a fast food restaurant like that, they're basically automated. Even back then in the late 80s, they're basically automated. And your role is the minimum human oversight effort that can be built into the system. Because they would spending money on pimply faced teenage labor is not always the best investment. And but so it takes about 2 weeks to kind of figure out how to do like everything you're going to do there. I mean, there were things, sort of management level stuff that I wasn't privy to or asked to learn how to do. But it really is a good feeling to be able to do all that stuff, and you feel kind of confident. And I remember I had a good summer. I liked the people I worked with. It was far from the worst job I've ever had. People talk about working in fast food as like the lowest point of employment. Now that's telemarketing, which I've done before, and that's just soul crushing. Fast food, you get to run around and do stuff and produce things and give people hamburgers, and they're usually pretty happy to see their food. So it's mentally not the worst kind of not the worst kind of place. But I remember at the end of the summer, my boss there approaching me and saying, you're really, really pretty good at this. Would you be interested in staying on during the school year? And I was like, no, I don't really think I can probably do that. And they were like, well, what if we, made you an assistant manager? And I was like, I don't have a driver's license. I'm 15 years old. I'm not even sure you can legally do that. But one of the things I learned about fast food, of course, is that it's a really competitive labor market. Not that they pay a ton, but once they find some people who they can kind of rely on to show up, sober, not steal, and basically do the work, they'll really kind of do a lot to hold on to them. The other thing I remember from that job, because I am sort of a snoot like you in some ways, the guy who owned the franchise that I worked for, he owned a bunch of similar franchises, some Burger Kings. I want to say he owned maybe some KFCs and some other stuff like that. It's the first person I ever saw who drove a Rolls Royce.
Whoa.
And so this is Texas, of course. Like, so you see a guy in a white convertible Rolls Royce, you expect him to be an oil guy, but he was the Burger King honcho of West
I
Texas.
mean, the Boss Hog Rolls Royce is not is not to be sneezed at. That is a high status situation.
Boss Hog drove a Cadillac Eldorado.
I know, but I'm what I'm picturing is a Boss Hog like vehicle.
Horns on the front.
Yeah, horns on the front, a driver. That's how I would do it if I was a middle low fast food franchise kingpin.
Yeah. This is, I mean, I'm always sort of interested in how people actually make money and how this stuff works. And I just remember in another context, I was in a Beretta shop buying a shotgun, and there was a guy in there buying a much more expensive shotgun. He was buying one of these like $35,000 shotguns, and we were just chatting, and I asked him what he did, and he was a guy who owned what was it? It was another franchise chain like that. It's the ones that make the Smoothie Kings.
Oh,
he owned a bunch of
low
Smoothie
overhead.
Kings.
Low overhead. You don't need a fryer. Small retail footprint. High profit margin.
Straight up swill.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody knows what an acai berry is, but you can charge them $9 for it. This is what I'm talking about. One of the things that I love about my work currently is I travel a lot and I give a lot of speeches, and a lot of the people I give speeches to are professional or trade groups, right? And I'm fascinated by all of the money that Americans are making doing things that you never read about, right? Doing these things. It's the widget, the idea that, if you read the Wall Street Journal, you're going to read about what's new and you're going to read about what's failing. You're going to read about the stuff that is, whoa, this is an emerging. You're going to read about AI, and you're going to read about weird new stuff. And you're also going to read about old things that are dying. You're going to read about the death of retail, brick and mortar retail, whatever. What you're not going to read about is how the guys in aggregate who are selling crushed stone are doing, right? People aren't checking in on aggregate. They're not checking in on who's making wiring harnesses for personal electronics. They're not checking in on all of that stuff that I suspect, and I have no data to support this, is really the mainstay of the U.S. economy. Stuff that we don't think about. It doesn't occur to us. It doesn't seem relevant, but is the mainstay of how Americans make a living.
It's particularly true on the manufacturing and heavy industry side. I remember some years ago I interviewed a guy who runs a company no one's ever heard of. It's a multi-billion-dollar company outside St. Louis, actually, your former stomping grounds. And they don't make any products, but they make components in every product, So what they make is colorings and coatings and flavorings and scents. So like all the scented candles, various food colorings, like what is it, red dye number 5 or something? That's the
or whatever they call it now to try to avoid the anxious mothers of America.
Yeah, so they make they don't make the pills, they make the little plastic coating that goes around the pill and that sort of stuff. And it's just a huge business, enormous business, enormously profitable business. No one's ever heard of it. There's some little nondescript industrial park somewhere outside St. Louis, and there's just every city's got 50 things like that.
How about the guys who mix and sell road salt? I'm not gonna say where, and I'm not gonna say who, but I have a friend who that's a big part of his business, and it would never occur to anybody that there are millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars spent every year in these United States on road salt. Well, where does the road salt come from? Somebody's got to blend it, package it in the 55-gallon drums, and deliver it to the Department of Highways where it needs to go. And a little company like that can have 100 employees. making good wages, doing this stuff. And all of that stuff fascinates me because the amount of time that we spend talking about the future of the economy, the amount of time that we spend talking about this trend and that trend, I think tends to overlook the ordinary commerce, the regular stuff that's going on to make our lives possible.
Yeah. All right, back to Wheeling.
Yes.
What'd you do at the newspaper there? So tell me a little about your time in newspapers and how you made the jump from newspapers to television and why.
Well, I have to tell you the story. You have to indulge me. I have to tell you the story about how I ended up in the newspaper business, which was the summer of after my senior year, or as the school year was coming to a conclusion. My father appeared like an apparition in my doorway and said, "Well, I hope you don't think you're going to spend this whole summer running up my tab at the country club and chasing girls around the pool." And I thought, how did he know? How did he know exactly what I had planned to do this summer? And he said, "I think you'll ought to have a job before you go to college." I was offended. I was shocked. How dare he interrupt with my plan for an awesome senior year summer? And my father was a very kind and gentle man. And I thought, well, I'm going to ignore this. And then a week or so later, he said, "How's the job hunt going?" And I thought, oh no, he means this to be a real thing. And so I procrastinated, and then finally, in desperation, turned to my brother, who had met a guy in a bar who was opening a hot dog push cart in Wheeling, West Virginia. Now, you will understand this. There are no hot dog push carts in Wheeling, West Virginia, a city of, I don't know, 20,000 people.
It doesn't have a lot of pedestrian traffic.
Right. This is not Manhattan, but this guy was going to do it. And it was the only job, and my deadline was coming. My father had made it clear that the deadline was, June whatever, and I had to do it. It was the only job I had. So I went and talked to the guy, and I had resigned myself to doing this work. And then as I was talking to him, I realized that I would be trying to sell hot dogs in front of the courthouse to the parents of my classmates and friends. And this indignity, there's nothing as fragile as the ego of a 17-year-old male. And this I could barely abide. But I said, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make the best of it. And then he showed me, he said, there'll be, and as for a uniform, and it had not occurred to me that someone would think that I would wear a uniform. He said, but I do want you to wear this. And it was a paper hat with a cartoon hot dog on it. And I knew that I could not, this was a bridge too far. And driving out of town, we went by the newspaper, the Wheeling Intelligencer and News Register. And the Intelligencer, older than the state itself, and right down there on Main Street. And I went in. My parents knew the publisher, and like a total idiot, I walked up to the receptionist and said that I'd like to talk to him. I was wearing Bermuda shorts and had my golf hat with me, like a real blank bag. And he did. And he talked to me. And then he picked up the phone and he called down to the sports department. And he said, I'd like you to put Chris on. Give him a chance. And I did. And I went down. And I didn't know exactly what to think, except for that this was better than wearing a paper hat with a hot dog on it. But I will tell you, I immediately, deeply, truly fell in love. It had never occurred to me that I wanted to be a journalist. It had never, if you'd have asked me then, I don't know what I would have told you I was going to do. Probably I would have said something about law school. I would have said, I don't know what I would have said. But it wouldn't have been, I'm going to spend my life in journalism. And these people were awesome. These people, the carpet held together with electrical tape, the robust aroma of cigarettes, the profanity, the the commonality, the gallows humor, the vibe, as they would say now, just hit me, and I just loved it. And I was thinking about that because I was thinking about how the desire to win the approval of your coworkers became which I had learned about working in my mom's cabinet shop, came in, and it became suddenly very important that these people think that I was legit. And when I got the first hit of writing something, which I'm sure was a 75-word description of an American Legion baseball game, and it went out and they published 30,000 copies of it and delivered it to everybody's house in town, I was hooked. I was 100% hooked. And college for me was, I look back and it was such a waste. I went to Hampden-Sydney College in Virginia, a very fine school. And the whole time I was in college, all I wanted to do was be out of college so I could go back to work in newspapering. I had fun. I had too much fun. But my focus, college was something that I had to finish so that I could go back to newspapering full time. And I worked newspaper jobs in the summers, and I was in.
Yeah, there's something kind of magical about those small city newspapers, where it's a little like being I think a pastor in a sense, in that you're in everyone's business.
Yep.
And you also have at least a sort of weekly message that's going out, and it's
a backstage pass to life. The appeal of this work for me is I can ask people questions. I can ask questions and do research about whatever I want. Whatever I want to do, I can start poking around on. Whatever interests me, I can start nosing around in. And if you're a 20-year-old or 21-year-old working and I went back to that same newspaper for 8 months or so after I graduated from college, before I moved down to Capital City newspaper in Charleston, West Virginia. But, there's a thrill that comes from saying, no, Mr. Mayor, I want the answer. No, we need to find this out. We can do this stuff. And part of what disappoints me about media in our current era, and by the way, I know that there is, I'm sure, a Goldbergian limit on compliments to the host, but one of the things that
no limit here.
One of the things that I love the most about your work is you say it, brother. You say it. Whatever you think needs to be said, you say it. At the Charleston Daily Mail, where I worked for a long time, there was a quote from Tennyson. With or without offense to friend or foe, I sketch your world exactly as it goes. And that idea of getting to be the skunk at the garden party and the person who says, yeah, I know everybody's really into this and everybody thinks this is great, but how about this? How about this? And obviously it can be taken too far. You can become Seymour Hersh or whatever. Like it goes contrarianism for its own sake, gets you into trouble. Gets you, for example, saying, those Nazis, were they the real villains of the Second World War? I'm just asking questions.
Lord.
It can take you to some bad places, but the thrill of journalism is that you, because of the platform that you have, and hopefully because of your capacities, you can say what you think needs to be said, and you can ask what needs to be asked. And when I see people who are, you can bleep it out. I don't know what CEI's thresholds are, but when you see a bunch of kiss asses who are going around paying obsequious court to an audience and the people who love the subjects, I think, well, why would you do that? That lacks the fun. That you've taken the sizzle out of this work is, if it's not a little bit dangerous and it's not a little problematic, then why is this good? Why is this something? Why don't you go sell insurance? Not that there's anything wrong with selling insurance.
No. It takes a little bit of social brazenness to be really good at that. And that isn't something that comes naturally to me. I always think of one of my favorite examples of it is, Bob Costa over at the Washington Post, who I worked with at National Review for a while when he was very early in his career. He was a Buckley Fellow, I guess. And I remember him being on the phone with someone and having this conversation where he's saying, I understand I'm calling you at home on 11:45 on a Sunday night, but I really need to get this. And sort of going back and forth with this clearly angry person. And he says, well, Senator McConnell, if you just answer my questions, you can go back to bed. And that's why he's at the Washington Post. And he's really good at that sort of thing. I think a lot of people don't understand about small newspapers like that is how labor intensive they are.
Oh, Lord.
Of doing things like, putting in sports scores and stuff like that. And I remember I worked at the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, my hometown of Lubbock, Texas. And as you may have heard, in West Texas, people care a tremendous amount about high school football.
Yes.
And so at the time, we had this thing where on Friday nights, when everyone's playing football, we would order a bunch of pizzas, and anybody who wanted to work could come in and get overtime hours covering high school football, because we would cover at least, outcome, score, one sentence worth of highlights for every little football team I think at the time we covered 47 counties or something, because we were the only, newspaper of any size really between Dallas and Albuquerque. So we had a big footprint. And so we'd end up having, 40 people sitting around on a Friday night working the phones, eating pizza, and getting high school football scores. And it was tremendously just fun, but also just a lot of work, a lot of just kind of grunt stuff. It's not all when you alluded to being 20 and working on your first big story, and I remember that feeling. And like every time you've got an actual story, like something new, it's as big as Watergate.
Totally.
As far as you're concerned.
Totally.
I mean, biggest story there's ever been. It's going to set the world on fire. And
wait till they hear about this. When the people find out about what's going on with the Belmar sewer line extension, I'm blowing the lid off this thing. The county commission's going down.
Exactly. Yeah. County commissioners are our mortal enemies in newspapers like that. But
you reminded
but a
me
lot
of
of it's just turning the crank on a big machine.
You reminded me of, there was a guy, one of the jobs in the sports section, which I think was 2 summers. One of the jobs was, in those days, Slim Fast diet supplement. Remember Slim Fast? Sponsored adult tennis leagues across the country. And there was a guy who called in every weeknight with the results of the Slim Fast tennis league that was going on. I don't know how they started putting him in the paper, why it needed to be in the paper, but he was adamant about the need to put agate little box scores in on the results of the Slim Fast tennis. And he was a heavy breather and he was impatient. And so as the lowest form of life in the newsroom, when the phone rang, and let's say it was 10 after 9, whatever the time was that everybody knew, you preferred to get the numbers from the dog track. There was a dog track, and that was more fun, more interesting. Get the numbers from from Wheeling Downs. That was good. But when the senior men knew that it was the breather was calling in, they would let it ring until I picked it up, and then I would do battle with this guy for 15 or 20 minutes, entering Slim Fast tennis scores to his great consternation. And I started out afraid of him and came to hate him.
Yeah, I've had a few people I've worked with.
Oh, and the other one, and the other one I have to tell you is, there was a gal who worked when I was working, moved over to the news side, and the way that we did the police blotter, the most read section of a small town newspaper after the obituaries, is the police blotter: who got arrested, where, how, and why. And you're scanning it to see if you see a name that you know, right? Whose kid got popped for stealing batteries at the Super X drugstore? Who got pulled over for DUI? What's happening? And so this was the lifeblood. And there was a gal, and she would walk up the 3 blocks or whatever, up an alley to go up to the cop shop. And when you walked in the door, I got to do it a few times. You walked in the door, they'd turn the book around. They'd say, okay, here you go. Like, here it is. You can just look through the police reports, which I'm sure they don't do anymore. You can look through the police reports. And then she would call back and read you the reports. And I remember the first time I did it, and she said, and I won't repeat myself. Now, hillbilly Hemingway, was a hunt and peck typist who I'm fast for hunting and pecking, but slow, because a newsroom, and this was true there. This was true at the Charleston Daily Mail. This was true when I went to the Washington Examiner later in the early days of the Examiner. It's a trade, right? The people who work there, and that includes the people who work in the newsroom, are tradespeople, and they have physical skills that they need to do it. And one of those, as it seems, would be typing. And I did not have that skill. I, a college idiot, did not have that skill. And I want to tell you, Kevin Williamson, if you want real fear, be a intern, a minimum wage intern at the Wheeling Intelligencer, have that phone call transferred over to you. She won't repeat herself. If you get it wrong, they'll kill you, because it's the most read and the most dangerous part, the most libel adjacent part of the newspaper. And you better get it right, or you know what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to walk those 3 blocks up in the rain and try to fix it. And you've got 4 or 5 other stories to write. You talk about the amount of work that you're doing. I look back on the volume, the production for the first decade of my career in news. Just what I was producing every day is I can't believe it. When today's a writing day for me. I have to write a column, and sometimes I think, oh boy, I've got to come up with 900 words today, and I want it to be this way and that way. That was like the first hour of work, right? The first hour of work, because you're going to have to write 4 or 5 things today of different lengths on different subjects, and you better not screw it up.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day. It came up in another context where 2 things. So most of my college newspaper experience, we had a daily newspaper at the University of Texas, and it was a pretty big newspaper back then. But most of that time I was in various management positions. I was managing editor and section editors and stuff. But I still wrote 1,000 news stories over the course of the 4 years I was in college. Just about 1,000 news stories, as I recall. But you have the libel adjacent thing in the small town police blotter. So I write sometimes about things that people get upset about.
Yes, I've noticed that.
Like, presidential elections and things like that. And some of these people who get upset are not psychically well-balanced people, and they will send you various death threats and things like that, which is fine. I get that stuff all the time. I'm sure you do too. But on a normalized basis, if you took the number of death threats versus the actual editorial output,
yes,
the police blotter at the Mainline Times in Lower Merion, Philadelphia, was the greatest source of death threats really over the course of my whole life. And someone would always walk in and say, hey, look, I got a DUI, and this can't be in the newspaper because I'm in a custody fight with my wife. And if it gets out, I'm going to lose custody of my kids. And I would always have to explain to them, this is a public record.
Yeah.
Your wife's lawyer already knows. He works at the courthouse. He knew before I did. It's just going to go in the paper, and it's going to be embarrassing, but people are going to know anyway. The worst one of that I got. So Lower Merion is a very special place. It's like the last of the old money, blue blood polo playing communities. And there was this couple, and they were this wealthy, high-powered professional couple who both got arrested separately on drug charges within a couple days of
Fantastic.
each other. And one of them got picked up like trying to buy drugs somewhere, and then the wife got pulled over for DUI, but then she had 4 ounces of coke in the car.
It's good for couples to share interests. It's important that a couple shares interests.
So of course we had fun with this story, and it was terrible. And but then like a week later, these 2 little girls come into my office. One who's about 13 and one who's probably about 10. These are their daughters, and they want to know why I'm putting these terrible lies about their parents in the newspaper. And so I go upstairs and I get the police reports and I give them to these kids. And I say, your mom has a blue Ford Thunderbird, right? And she said, yeah. Haven't seen that car in a little while, have you? No, it's in the shop. No, it's in the police impound. And that's why your car's not there. And that stuff is really not fun. That
I
aspect
had
of
I
it.
had the I had
But
the brother.
the other aspect, awesome. Go ahead, please.
I had a brother of a murder defendant come to my apartment with a firearm.
Mm,
I don't think he was really going to do anything, and I had covered that case like a real. I'm sure if I went back and found my coverage, I would want to kill me too. I would also want to kill me because it was juicy. It had it all. It had political angles. It had lust. It had everything. And I'm sure I wrote it to the hilt. And it was over, and I went back to my apartment, satisfied that I had been on page one, and the Charleston Daily Mail, if you come from Wheeling, West Virginia, was a big deal, right? It was
hmm
a big deal, and I was the court reporter. I covered the courthouse, and I was probably 20, I don't know, 26 or 27 years old. And I thought, like, I'd made it. I thought I had arrived. And I went home, and I was home. I'm sure I was getting ready to go out to celebrate my awesomeness. And this guy came to the door, and I sat there on the floor clutching my shotgun and a cordless phone, waiting for the police to come. He was gone by the time the police got there. But when later in my career, I would say things that would upset millions of people, not one family in Kanawha County, West Virginia, but millions of people around the country. And I would say things that would upset them. And people would threaten to kill me. I would remember that. And I would say, they're probably not going to come to my house with a gun. They're probably not going to come. They're probably going to, they're probably just an idiot saying something on the internet. And sometimes,
Sometimes you upset one family in Palm Beach,
yes,
and it ends up
they
becoming a
get
big deal.
particularly upset. And I don't want to minimize it. There certainly have been moments in my career where I had to entertain the thought about, what if somebody hurt my kids, right?
Yeah.
And having to take the extra steps of making sure that their locations were not revealed, and making sure that schools and organizations weren't posting their names and pictures on the internet and stuff like that, because you don't want to be wrong about that. You don't. I can be as blithe as I want about my own safety, but then you think, okay, well, we should take some reasonable precaution as it relates to these kids.
Yeah.
But when people were like, "Oh, you should talk about the death threats that you've received," I think, why? Why would I possibly give some weirdo, some bottom of the internet creature, the satisfaction of talking about that? And I've actually had people physically try to harm me, and that happens in local news, right?
Yes.
That's a local news when you have the families of people who feel that they've been wronged and are obsessed with the coverage. Those are the that much more likely was I to get into a fight at the red carpet lounge, with somebody who could give me a good thrashing, than I was that, MAGA Nation would come and kill me, after the 2020 election.
Yeah. Speaking of the 2020 election, one of the things you and I have in common is that sometimes when we leave a job, it becomes a public controversy.
Sometimes you can get a good book out of
I
it.
don't know. You get a good book in both
Yeah.
cases. Yeah, I think so. Um, Tell me about television.
Okay.
I think that the whole world of things like Fox News and NewsNation, where you are now, of TV commentary and TV political news, is so opaque to people who are outside of that world. Like people, and even the smart, sophisticated, educated people don't really know how that world works. And I'll tell you an example of this. That when I lived in New York, I was on Fox News a lot because I was a conservative writer living in New York, which means you get to be on Fox News a lot if you
Well,
want to.
and
You don't get paid
you're
for it.
good. You're a non-garbage
Well, I'm not
offering.
that great at television, and this is not false humility. Television's not really my thing. I'm more of a writer than a talker. But I would see friends like friends who are smart people, you sort of from back home and whatnot, and they would assume that I was making like private jet money, like Sean Hannity, because they saw me on television,
Right.
and I would have to explain to them, I don't get paid for this at
Right.
all. I just happen to work a few blocks away, and I've got articles to push and books to sell, and television, helps
And
to
my
do it.
employer would pay
And
them.
it's a weird little economy.
Yeah, my
What's
employer,
that?
and your employer would have paid them to get you on, right? It would have been worth it to
Well,
them.
National Review, no, they don't like to
Well,
spend money, but
if
they might
if
have,
it
yeah.
were possible, it is a thing of
The Weekly Standard would have
yeah,
paid.
it's a thing of value.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
my
So how do you make the transition from newspapers into television?
so
Besides, being handsome and obviously
oh yes,
photogenic.
it's for my looks. So I became a political editor, which is a fantastic fake title. I became a political editor at age 28 at the Charleston Daily Mail. And if you want to know how dumb I am, I believed that I would retire from that job. I had an office with a door that closed. I was the youngest or one of the youngest, and I was following in the footsteps of these guys I revered in West Virginia newspapering. One of my mentors, Bob Kelly, had that job. Richard Grimes, Paul Owen. So there was this long succession, and I got the job. And I had a column twice a week, and I could cover whatever I wanted to in politics. In West Virginia, as you know, because of the dearth of other vital activities, the government takes up an astonishing amount of people's thought and time. Politics and the government in West Virginia, like other dysfunctional states, Louisiana, poor states typically, the government, what's going on, what the state Senate is doing does not matter to you very much if you live in New York or even in Florida or someplace where commerce is bustling and people are doing all of these things. Albany seems far away from Manhattan, but everybody in West Virginia has to care because so much of the economy and so much of what people do. So I thought, I'm set. And I don't know, 8 months after I got the job, I was called into a meeting and given the favor of being told that the newspaper was going to be closed. And I said, "Oh boy, okay, that's bad." I had a 40-year plan for this job that is now not going to work out. And the job I found was there was a startup that had bought the state business newspaper, and they had a bunch of TV stations together in West Virginia. And if you want to find something truly awful, you can find me. I did an interview with my hometown TV station recently about the Sunday show that you were on. And they dug up some clips of me from back in the day. And brother, let me tell you, man, it's I have more hair and of a darker color, but other than that, everything else is pretty bad. And I was so young. I was, 29 years old or whatever. I was so young. But anyway, I went over there. I continued to write. I kept the title of political editor, but I started fooling around with TV more. After 3 years there, I moved to Washington, took the job at the Washington Examiner, and I got a full second education at the Washington Examiner. Stephen G. Smith, who had been the Nation editor at Time, who had been many important and wonderful things in the news business, was the boss, and the managing editor who I got to sit next to every day was Mike Hedges, Iron Mike Hedges, a foreign correspondent who had covered every war, every U.S. conflict from Panama to Iraq, had finally decided that he should come home and raise his children and not be eating camel bolognese and getting dysentery in the Puntland anymore. And it was a great fit because he was from Bracken County, Kentucky. or no, he was from Campbell County, Kentucky. So he was a hillbilly, and Stephen Smith is not, is whatever the absolute opposite of hillbilly is. Stephen Smith was not, but they both had these decades of great experience at big time places in Washington. And I worked my fingers to the bone and absorbed everything that they were teaching me. Stephen Smith was the greatest line editor imaginable. With his violet pen, he could do surgery. He made me a much better editor, and he made me a much better writer, because he had that special gift that some editors have, which is to make it better, but keep it in your voice, right? A lot of editors, myself included, have a predilection for forcing their voice into other people's copy, and Stephen didn't. And I learned all this stuff. And then one day, a guy I was editing, Bill Salmon, had imprudently agreed to a holiday weekend hit on Fox News. And Bill has a very great way of telling people bad news like it's good news. And he told the folks at Fox, oh, gosh, I can't make it work, actually. But you know who you should have on? You should have on my editor. And Bill was the White House correspondent for the Examiner. You should have on my editor. And I did it. And after I did it, the very thing that you described, where I thought I was doing big and important work. I thought that the pieces I was writing and what I was doing was important, and I was influencing the discussion. Brother, 2 hits on Fox News, I was like, oh, people are actually paying attention to this, and I'm feeling the feedback like I did when I was a kid or when I was in Charleston, writing about stuff that people were actually engaged in. And I saw that, and I made a decision, which was, I'll do whatever TV I'm asked to do. I saw immediately the scam, which is they need people. They got to fill 24 hours a day. If you're basically okay, right? If you can basically be okay, non-offensive, non-hideous, they'll put you on TV, right? And I did reps, brother. I did reps. I ground out more hits on cable TV, and I did them all. I did CNN, I did MS, I did Fox, I did hit after hit after hit. And this creates tingles in publishers. Publishers see you on television, and they say, it must be working. This must be working. It must be happening. So I was doing it. The only hit I ever walked out on was one with Russia Today. I forget, they were must have been, I forget what the topic was, but I just took the microphone off and just left. And I made a few bright line distinctions. At that point, I said, okay, we can't do all of the TV that is asked, but we can do most of the TV that's asked. And as long as I never say something that I think is not true, and as long as I acquit myself well enough in the space, if I don't lie, if I don't dissemble, if I don't elide, then I can do it. And I cranked him out. And then Salmon, Fox News hired Salmon away from the Examiner to be its managing editor, the old Brit Hume job. And Bill hired me to come over to Fox to keep my phony baloney title of political editor. And I went over to Fox, and I wrote. It's always been important to me, whatever I do, to keep writing. Writing keeps me honest. TV is it's too easy to fake your way through on TV. You got to write, because writing reveals. It reveals what you don't know. And so I wrote. I was at Fox for 10 years, and I wrote a daily political note, and I did all that stuff, and I helped with coverage, and I did, morning meetings to help figure out coverage for the day. I worked on a bunch of stuff, and I got to be part of their decision desk. And a decision desk is where the network or the newspaper hires very smart nerds and puts them in fellowship with the people from the network. So there you have a team, and it was me and Salmon, and then all of these consultant nerds. And I got a third education. right? Working with these guys, I got a third education in data science. I had known enough. I'd always been demographically obsessed from the time that I was a kid. I was always fascinated by demography, but I got another education in how data science works from these guys, and I loved it. So I had this job, and I did it at Fox, and I had a very good run. And then, as we were alluding to, when the Republican Party did not like the results of the 2020 election, I became a unnecessary. No, I became a liability. I became a liability for the company. And I should say, nobody owes me a job. Fox News didn't owe me a job. And for the business model that they had, having a guy whose name was synonymous in the minds of viewers with the anguishing defeat of a close presidential election wasn't in their interest. They didn't want to keep me, and that's okay. But it became, yes, I definitely got fired on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. It definitely turned into a whole thing. I definitely testified in front of Congress about it. It turned into a whole shebangy bang. And, what I learned along the way is that the special power that television has in our society is still to validate. Television is a validator. We worship, we hear a lot about what's wrong with the internet and what the internet's doing to people and how it's ruining people. Well, when I was doing research for the book that I wrote subsequent to that, you know what I find out? I found out that television had ruined us so thoroughly, so completely, down to the studs, had changed the way that our brains worked, had changed the way that we thought about politics, had thought about each other, had thought about everything. And I think I had to read Amusing Ourselves to Death when I was in college. So I'm sure I half-assed read it. I'm sure I faked my way through the reading of it. But I reread that book and I said, oh, right. So television has power because it looks good, right? It's clean, it's slick, the people are attractive, the graphics are pleasing, it's good. And that provides validation. But the central point of validation comes from the fact that for most Americans alive today, or half of Americans alive today at least, television was the idol in our homes. It sat in the center of our homes. It was at the center of our hearts. And the statistic that blew me away was that average household consumption of television in the United States did not peak until 2009, 2010, and it was nearly 9 hours a day. I don't know how it was in your house growing up. We had the TV on. The TV was on. It wasn't, oh, it's appointment television, we're going to go watch television. My parents kept the TV on. My parents went to sleep with the television on. It was TV, and it was what was on. And so this is a 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. So for 60 years, television was the idol in the center of the American home and in our lives. So it has this extraordinary validating component to it, and it screws with people's brains.
Yeah. One of the sort of best accidental things that ever happened to me was when I was pretty young. I would have been in my early to mid 20s. I happened to be at a thing where I got to meet and spend a little bit of time with Walter Cronkite. And Walter Cronkite was a crackpot.
Yeah?
He was an absolute kook.
Oh, I love
an
it.
absolute kook. This is when George W. Bush would still have been governor of Texas, but it looked like he was going to be a presidential candidate. And Cronkite believed he was a front for some sort of like evangelical Taliban kind of
boy.
thing. And I don't mean in the sense that people talk about like rhetorically in an excessive way. Like he really thought they were going to like suspend the Constitution.
Like it's a Handmaid's Tale situation.
Yeah, like, he's a Methodist, right? I mean, they don't really go in for that sort of thing. But since then, I never got buffaloed by that whole, voice of God television
Yes.
news thing.
Yes.
So when I finally got into the, point in life where I was doing some of this stuff and I was involved in it a bit, I went into it skeptical.
Yes.
And that skepticism, I think served me pretty well. We're going to have to wrap up here in just a bit, but one thing I do like to ask people is, well, two questions. One of them is more pleasant to talk about than the others, but they're easier to talk about, which is tell me about the best job you've had and why it was the best job you had and what you liked about it. And also, people always have a hard time answering this. I think people later in their careers, unless they're like at the very end of them, and you're a bit younger than I am, so you're kind of right in the middle of things. But if you weren't doing this or something like it,
Mm-hmm.
what would you have liked to have done in life instead?
What would I have liked to have done? Oh, that's a much harder question. That is a much harder question.
Because we all know what we'd be doing. We'd have gone to law school or something.
Yeah, I would have washed out of a corporate career working for like the Union Pacific Railroad. And I would be operating I don't know, an equipment rental store in Elm Grove, West Virginia, or something like that as a hireling, I assume. What would I like to be doing? I can't imagine liking anything more than writing. I really cannot imagine liking anything more than writing.
That's why it's a hard question.
I guess I would I would want to give speeches full time. I guess. I don't know. I guess that's just part of what I do. So I'm evading your answer. Gosh, Kevin, that is an extraordinarily hard question. The question about
You never thought about being an academic or an actor or
I'll take
or
actor.
going into the military or
No. I'm soft. An actor.
that's the sort of person who wishes he'd gone into
Yes,
the
that
military.
is true. No, I'd say an actor. That would be a lot of fun to be in Hollywood.
I think it would have been a good one.
I think that would have been a lot of fun to be in Hollywood and make movies. That would probably be great. I bet I'd enjoy that.
Well, how far along in life was Fred Thompson when he started doing
That is
that?
true. That is true. I have the jowls for it. I do have the jowls for it. So it's all things are possible.
You could be a Southern governor.
I have the suspenders. I do have, and I have the foghorn leghorn energy that America needs in its governors. And the bar is pretty low these days. The bar is low.
It's funny the way just what your face says about you means to your career in that world. Nick Offerman tells a funny story about not having much success when he was a young actor, and his agent told him, "Just grow out your mustache and wait for your sheriff years."
Yes. Yes. And by the way, if I can just say, I spoke a lot of ill of television. One of the things that television does, like writing, is reveal our natures. You can't pretend to be what you're not for very long on television because people see you, right? They see you. And you can play a character on TV, but it has to be pretty close to who you are, right? And the people who succeed on television, the distance between their persona and their self is not that great. The people who fall apart are the people who have too much distance between those things because, like Roger Ailes said, if you watch TV with the sound off, you really see it, right? And you can see people and you can see who they are. And knowing who you are is very helpful in all things in life. But when you're doing something where you're asking millions of people to look at your face, you better know who you are. You better know what you're doing. And I have to be but a simple country pundit. And as for the best job I've ever had, it's very easy.
And you're not allowed to say the one you currently have.
Oh,
that's the rule.
Why? You're very unfair.
Best job you've had other than the one you currently have.
Because my 3 or 4 jobs
You've
currently.
got about 4 jobs, right?
Yeah, my 4 jobs currently are the best job I've ever had, for sure. But I guess I will say, I'll say that time at the Washington Examiner when I learned so much and had so much fun, and I was old enough to start putting it to use, but young enough to be learning and in a posture of listening and learning. That was really great.
Yeah. And if you're talking to young people, people in their sort of maybe late teens or early 20s, everyone knows that to work, one of the things you want to get out of it is an income and enough money to make a living, and hopefully a little bit more than that. What else should people be looking to get out of their work? What's the most important thing other than just the basics of material life?
They will be lied to many times and told that if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And that is, of course, hogwash. That is utter hogwash. But the truth is adjacent to it, which is you had better do what you love, or you will never do the work that's necessary to be good at it. Right? If you choose a vocation or you choose a profession on the basis of, yeah, it's pretty good money, but I don't like it, I'm not in love with this work, you'll fail anyway, because you have to love it to put in the hours and hours and hours and work that's necessary to do it. So it's the love that you have for what you find in your life is the rocket fuel that will propel your career forward. That's what you have to have in the tank when you start.
Yeah. Chris Stirewalt, reformed newspaperman and simple country pundit.
Brother, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.